the millionaire lives consumed by grief after losing his twin daughters in a tragic accident. Every Saturday he visits their graves, blaming himself for not having done more to protect them. But everything changes when a simple girl reveals that his daughters are alive, hidden.
Robert Miller woke up that Saturday, just as he had woken up every other Saturday for the past 3 years. The alarm clock no longer needed to ring. His body was already conditioned to open his eyes at precisely 6:30 in the morning, as if an invisible force were yanking him from sleep. But to call it sleep would be overly generous. Robert hadn't truly slept in a long time. He merely closed his eyes and floated in a state between consciousness and the void, where memories came like relentless waves, bringing with them the pain that never ceased. The Isai. Morning light filtered through the heavy bedroom curtains, timidly illuminating the large, luxurious space that no longer held any meaning for him. The king-size bed seemed like a desert of white sheets where he lost himself every night. The impeccable white walls, the custom-made furniture of fine wood, the walk-in closet that could house the clothes of an entire family, everything that had once represented achievement and success was now just an empty stage for a life that no longer made sense. Robert rose slowly, feeling the weight of his 52 years as if they were 80. He had been a strong man, the kind who impressed with his presence, his erect posture, his firm gaze that conveyed confidence and determination. Now, when he looked at himself in the bathroom mirror, he saw a stranger, the hair beginning to grey at his temples, the wrinkles around his eyes that were once just expression lines, and now seemed like deep furrows carved by sorrow, the unshaven beard he let grow because he no longer saw a reason to care about appearances. He turned on the faucet and let the cold water run over his hands before splashing it on his face. The icy contact woke him a little more, bringing him back to the reality of that Saturday. Another Saturday, the weekly ritual he observed religiously, without fail, without exception, rain or shine, cold or heat. He would be there. He would always be there. The house was too quiet, a heavy silence that seemed to have texture, occupying every room like a ghostly presence. Robert walked down the wide hallway, past the living room, where the Italian designer furniture remained untouched, past the dining room with its table for 12 that never had more than one person sitting at it, and arrived in the kitchen. Mrs. Sebastian, the housekeeper who had worked with him for 15 years, was already there, preparing coffee as she did every morning. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," she said, in that soft, respectful tone she always used with him. "I've made your coffee just the way you like it." Robert nodded without a word. Mrs. Sebastian was one of the few people still remaining in his life. She had seen everything. She had been there during the good days, when the house was full of life and laughter, and she had remained afterward when silence took over. Everything. She never asked questions, never tried to console him with empty words. She just continued to be there, doing her job with the same dedication as always, and perhaps that was why Robert kept her around. He drank the black coffee, strong, without sugar. He ate half a slice of buttered toast, more out of obligation than hunger. Appetite was something that had been lost along with so many other things. Mrs. Sebastian watched him from the corner of her eye as she cleaned the counter, and he could feel her concern, but she knew better than anyone that there was nothing to be said. At 7:40, Robert went back up to the bedroom and opened the closet. He glanced over the rows of Italian suits, imported designer shirts, shoes that cost more than many people earned in a month. He chose a pair of discreet dress pants, a simple white shirt and comfortable shoes. He was no longer the powerful businessman he had once been. He had stepped away from the business long ago. The company he had built from scratch, which he had grown into one of the largest in the real estate development sector in New York, was now managed by a team of competent executives. They sent him monthly reports, requested authorization for major decisions, but on a day-to-day basis, Robert was absent. How could he care about contracts, bids, profits, and losses when he had lost everything that truly mattered? He descended the stairs of the Greenwich mansion, crossed the meticulously manicured garden tended by a gardener who came 3 times a week, and entered the garage where 5 cars remained parked. He chose the black Mercedes, the most discreet of them all, There was no more ostentation in his life. There was nothing. Left, he wanted to show the world. The New York City traffic on a Saturday morning was milder than on weekdays, but the city still buzzed with its chaotic energy. Robert drove on autopilot, following the route he knew by heart. He left the luxury gated community, took I-95 toward the city, and continued to the Bronx. The cemetery was in an older part of the borough, far from the affluent neighborhoods where he lived, but he had insisted it be there. At the time, when it all happened, he still believed that somehow that place would bring peace, as if the location could make a difference. He parked the car in front of the high gates of the cemetery. The place was immense, with its tree-lined avenues, imposing mausoleums and simple headstones, all telling stories of lives that were gone. Robert walked through the main gate and followed the stone path he knew so well. 3rd Avenue on the left, then another 50 yards to the right, near the large oak tree that turned a brilliant gold in the fall. There they were, the 2 headstones. Simple white marble with the names engraved in golden letters. Julia Miller and Beatrice Miller. The birth dates so close, separated by only 10 minutes, as were all the important dates in their lives when they were still around. And the date he still couldn't accept as real, the one that marked the day his life had completely fallen apart. Robert knelt before the headstones. He had brought flowers, as he always did, white roses, their favorites. He placed half on each headstone, arranging them carefully, as if the girls could still see and appreciate the gesture. "Good morning, my princesses," he began, his voice choked with emotion. "Daddy's here again. Another week. Has passed. 7 more days without you." He spoke softly, as if sharing secrets. The words came out with difficulty, blocked by the emotion he tried to control, but never fully could. "The house is so empty without you. I wake up and for a second, just for a second, I forget. I forget that you're not there anymore. And then the memory comes back, and it's like it's all happening again, like I'm getting the news for the first time." Robert closed his eyes, trying to hold back the tears that were already beginning to form. He had cried so much in these 3 years that he thought he had no tears left, but they always came treacherous and insistent. "I should have done things differently," he continued, his voice growing quieter. "I should have been more present. I should have left the office earlier, spent more time with you. You always asked me to come to your school plays, your friends' birthday parties, and I always said I had important meetings, that Daddy had to work. And for what? To build an empire that means nothing without you here?" He opened his eyes and stared at the names, engraved on the marble. Julia and Beatrice, his girls, his identical twins who had come into the world together and who, according to what he was told, had left together as well. They were only 9 years old when it happened. 9 years of a life that had barely begun, full of dreams and possibilities that would never be realized. Robert remembered every detail about those girls. Julia, the more extroverted one, always laughing, always inventing games. She wanted to be a veterinarian, constantly bringing home stray animals she found on the street. He could still hear her voice, high-pitched and full of enthusiasm, saying, "Dad, look at the kitten I found. Can we keep him, please?" And Beatrice, quieter, more observant, but with a sensitivity that touched anyone's heart. She loved to draw, spending hours with her colored pencils, creating entire worlds on paper. Robert still had all her drawings saved in a box in his office. He couldn't bring himself to get rid of anything that had belonged to them. The accident had happened on a Friday night. They were coming home from a birthday party with their mother. Marcella was driving. According to what he was told, a car had run a red light and hit their vehicle head-on. The car had rolled over and caught fire. By the time the firefighters arrived, it was too late. Robert hadn't been able to see the bodies. Marcella had insisted it was better that way, that he should remember the girls as they were, full of life. And he, in the midst of shock and unbearable pain, had agreed. He had let her handle everything. The wake had been closed casket, the funeral, a fog of grief he barely remembered. Marcella had been injured, but she had survived. She was hospitalized for 2 weeks, and then after she was discharged, she had disappeared from his life. They had already been separated for a year when the accident happened. The divorce had been tumultuous, full of accusations and hurt on both sides. But none of that mattered anymore. The girls were everything. and now they were gone. "You know I love you, don't you?" Robert whispered, wiping a tear that trickled down his face. "I would give anything, absolutely anything, to have you back, to be able to hug you one more time, to hear your laughter, to see your eyes sparkle. I would trade all my assets, all my fortune, everything I have for just one more day with you." He stayed there for over an hour, as he always did. He talked about the week that had passed, about small details of daily life, as if they could hear him. He told them about Mrs. Sebastian, who always asked about them, about the garden at the house where they loved to play, about the immense longing that didn't diminish, that didn't ease, that only transformed into a constant weight on his chest. When he finally stood up, his legs were stiff from kneeling for so long. Robert adjusted the flowers one last time, ran his hand gently over each headstone as if stroking the girl's hair, and said goodbye. "Until next week, my princesses. Daddy will always be here. Always." He began to walk back along the stone path, his steps slow and heavy. The cemetery was busier now, other people visiting their loved ones, tending to flowers, lighting candles. There was an elderly woman he always saw who came to visit her husband. There was a young man who was also always there on Saturdays, probably visiting a family member, each with their own story of loss, each carrying their own pain. Robert was almost at the main gate when something caught his attention. It was a girl. She must have been about 12 or 13, dressed simply, in clothes that looked mended in places. She was standing near one of the side avenues, and when she saw Robert, she took a few steps in his direction. He didn't pay much attention at first, thinking she was just another one of the many people who frequented the place. But the girl kept coming toward him, with hesitant but determined steps. There was something in her eyes, an urgency, a need to say something. Robert slowed his pace, not quite understanding what was happening. The girl stopped about 6 feet from him, biting her lower lip, as if gathering the courage to speak. "Excuse me, sir," she finally said, her voice thin but firm. Robert looked at her more closely now. She had brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail, dark eyes that showed a mixture of fear and determination. Her clothes were clean but worn, and she clutched a small school backpack to her chest as if it were a shield. "Yes?" Robert replied, trying to be kind despite his confusion. The girl looked around, as if checking if anyone else was paying attention, and then took another step toward him. "You come here every Saturday, right? I always see you," she said, still hesitant. Robert frowned. "I do. Why?" The girl took a deep breath, and then the words came out in a rush, as if she needed to say it before her courage failed her. "I saw them, sir. The girls you visit. I saw them asking for money at the traffic light. The world seemed to stop for a moment." Robert stood completely still, processing what he had just heard. It made no sense. None of it made any sense at all. He opened his mouth to reply, but no sound came out. The girl, sensing the confusion and shock on his face, continued speaking, now with more urgency. "I swear it's true, sir. They live on my street. They're two identical girls, really identical, you know? Twins. They live in a little house near where I live, in the Bronx. I see them almost every day. They stand at the light on the avenue nearby asking for money from the cars. And there's a woman who watches them from a distance." Robert felt his legs weaken. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a cruel joke. Or maybe the girl was confused. Twin girls weren't that rare. They could be other children, anyone else. "You must be mistaken," he finally managed to say, his voice hoarse. "The girls I come to visit, they passed away 3 years ago." The girl shook her head vigorously. "No, sir. I'm sure. They look just like the photos I've seen. The other day I was passing the light and stopped to get a better look, and one of them even looked at me. I kept thinking, and then I remembered seeing you here at the cemetery. Every Saturday you come, you stand at those 2 headstones. So I got worried, you know, because if you think they're here but they're over on my street—" "Where?" Robert interrupted, his voice suddenly firmer, more urgent. "Where exactly did you see these girls?" The girl gave him the address, a street Robert didn't even know, in a neighborhood on the outskirts of the Bronx, a place far removed from everything that was part of his reality. "And you're absolutely sure it's them?" he asked, still fighting against his disbelief. "How can you be so sure?" The girl reached into her backpack and pulled out an old cell phone with a cracked screen. She fumbled with it for a few seconds and then showed it to Robert. On the screen was a blurry photo, taken from a distance, but it was possible to see two girls at a traffic light. They looked alike, that was undeniable. Robert took the phone with trembling hands, zooming in on the image as much as he could. The quality was poor, the distance great, but there was something about those girls, something in the way they were standing, the way one of them held the other's hand. His heart began to pound erratically. "When did you take this picture?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Last week," the girl replied. "On Thursday. They were there during rush hour, when the traffic is at a standstill." Robert handed the phone back to the girl, his mind racing. This couldn't be true, it was impossible. But what if it wasn't? What if, for some absurd reason he couldn't comprehend, those were really his daughters? What if they had been alive all this time and he didn't know? "Can you take me there?" he asked suddenly, surprising even himself. "Can you show me where these girls are?" The girl hesitated for a moment, but then she nodded. "I can, sir. I live nearby. If we go now, maybe they'll be there. They usually play in the yard in the afternoon." Robert didn't think twice. "Let's go," he said, already starting to walk toward the parking lot. The girl followed, almost running to keep up with his long, hurried strides. As he unlocked the car and opened the door for the girl to get in, Robert felt something he hadn't felt in 3 long years. A spark of something that could be hope, mixed with fear, with disbelief, with an urgent desperation to find out the truth. His hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel, and when he started the car, he realized his heart was racing. Could it be possible? Could it really be true? Or was he just clinging to a cruel illusion that would make his pain even greater when he found out they were just other children, other girls who happened to look like his? He glanced at the girl in the passenger seat, who was clutching her backpack and staring ahead with a serious expression. "What's your name?" Robert asked as he pulled out of the parking lot. "Isabella," she replied. "My name is Isabella." Robert just nodded, concentrating on his driving. Isabella began to give directions, and he followed each instruction mechanically, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions he could barely process. The journey seemed endless and yet too fast at the same time. With every block they passed, the landscape changed. The clean, tree-lined streets gave way to busier avenues, then to simpler neighborhoods, and finally to the outskirts, where the houses were more modest, the streets narrower, and life pulsed in a different way. Could it be possible that his daughters were here, in a place so far from everything he knew? And if they were, what did that mean? How had they ended up here? And why had he believed for 3 years that they were dead? "It's there," Isabella said suddenly, pointing to a street on the left. "The house is the third one, the light blue one." Robert turned the car onto the indicated street, his heart now beating so hard he could hear the pulse in his ears. He parked a few yards before the house, turned off the engine, and just sat there, staring at the simple structure in front of him. It was a small house with faded paint, a simple iron gate, and a small front yard. Completely different from the mansion where he lived, completely different from anything he could have imagined for his daughters, and then he saw them. 2 girls playing in the yard. 2 identical girls, Julia and Beatrice, his daughters. Robert sat paralyzed inside the car, his hands still gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. He blinked once, twice, 3 times, trying to make sure his eyes weren't playing a cruel trick on him. But no matter how many times he blinked, the scene in front of him remained the same. 2 identical girls were playing in the small yard of the faded blue house. They must have been around 12 now, a little taller than he remembered, with longer hair but still unmistakably them. The way one of them gestured animatedly as she spoke, while the other listened attentively. The way they moved with that natural synchronicity that only twins who grew up together possessed. Julia and Beatrice, his girls, alive. "Mr. Miller, are you okay?" Isabella's voice came from far away, breaking the trance he had fallen into. "It's them, isn't it?" "I knew it was." Robert couldn't answer. His throat was tight, emotions welling up into a ball impossible to swallow. Tears began to stream down his face without his control. 3 years of mourning, of unbearable pain, of visits to the cemetery, of conversations with marble headstones. 3 years believing his daughters were dead, and they were here, alive, playing in a simple yard as if nothing had happened. He pushed the car door open with such force that it slammed against its frame, the sound echoing down the quiet street. His legs trembled as he got out of the vehicle, but he didn't care. He started walking toward the house's gate, his steps faltering at first, then faster, more urgent. "Sir, wait," Isabella called, running after him. "You can't just go in like that." But Robert wasn't listening anymore. His entire being was focused on those 2 girls in the yard. He reached the iron gate and pushed it open without hesitation, making a metallic creak that immediately caught the girls' attention. They stopped playing and turned to look at the stranger who had just entered their yard. Robert froze when his eyes met theirs. They were the same eyes he remembered, brown and expressive, but now there was something different in them. Suspicion, fear, and no recognition. "Julia, Beatrice," Robert said in a choked voice, taking a few more steps toward them. "My girls, it's me. It's Daddy." The 2 girls glanced at each other quickly, then took a step back. The one on the right, whom Robert was sure was Julia, by the way she held herself, spoke first. "We don't know you, sir. I think you should leave." Robert felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. They didn't recognize him. His own daughters didn't know who he was. How was this possible? He continued to advance, his hands outstretched in a gesture that was meant to be comforting, but only made the girls retreat further. No, you don't understand," he tried to explain, his voice desperate. "I'm your father, Robert Miller. You are my daughters, Julia and Beatrice. You were 9 years old when I thought I lost you." The other girl, Beatrice, now spoke as well, her voice quieter but just as frightened. "We don't have a father, and those aren't our names. You're confusing us with other people." "No, I'm not," Robert insisted, feeling desperation rise in his chest. "You are my daughters. Julia, you always wanted to be a veterinarian. You loved animals, and Beatrice, you spent hours drawing. You drew flowers, houses, whole stories on paper." The girls grew visibly more tense at this information. There was a flicker of something in their eyes, perhaps confusion, perhaps a distant fragment of memory. But before either could respond, the front door of the house flew open. A woman ran out, her eyes wide with panic at the sight of Robert in the yard with the girls. She was thin, her face marked by time and hardship, wearing simple, worn clothes. But when she spoke, Robert recognized her voice immediately, even after so many years. "Get out of here," Marcella practically screamed, placing herself between Robert and the girls, her arms spread in a protective gesture. "Get out of my house now, or I'm calling the police." Robert was completely stunned. Marcella, his ex-wife, the girl's mother, the woman he thought had survived the accident that had supposedly taken his daughters' lives, and she was here, alive, protecting 2 girls she claimed were not who he knew they were. "Marcella," he said, his voice a mixture of shock and rising anger. "What is going on here? What did you do?" Marcella faced him with an expression that mixed fear and determination. "I didn't do anything. You need to leave. These are not your daughters." "Don't lie to me," Robert exploded, his voice rising in volume. "I know who they are. I recognize my own daughters. You told me they were dead. You made me believe for 3 years that they were dead. I visited their graves every single Saturday, Marcella. I cried for them. I died a little every day thinking I had lost my girls, and all this time they were here, alive, with you." The girls, still behind Marcella, watched the scene with wide eyes, clearly frightened and confused. Isabella had also entered the yard and stood near, the gate, unsure of what to do. "Mum, what is he saying?" The girl he called Julia asked, her voice small and scared. "Who is this man?" Marcella closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering her strength. When she opened them again, tears were streaming down her face. "Go inside," she told the girls, her voice firm despite the tears. "Now, and don't come out." "But, Mom," Beatrice tried to protest. "Now," Marcella repeated more firmly. "Please." The two girls hesitated for a moment, but then obeyed, running into the house and closing the door behind them. Robert saw them peeking through the window, their small, frightened faces pressed against the glass. As soon as the girls were inside, Marcella turned fully to Robert. Her face was pale, and she was visibly trembling. "You can't be here," she said, her voice lower now, almost a whisper. "You don't understand. You can't just show up like this." "Then explain it to me," Robert demanded, taking a step toward her. "Explain to me how my daughters are alive when you told me they were dead. Explain the graves, the funeral, everything. Explain this whole lie." Marcella ran her hands over, her face clearly struggling with her emotions. "It wasn't a lie, it was protection. I was protecting them." "Protection? Protection from what? From me? I'm their father, Marcella. I never did anything to hurt them." "Not from you," she replied, her voice breaking. "From other people, dangerous people. You had no idea what was happening. The risk they were in." Robert shook his head, incredulous. "What risk? What are you talking about?" Marcella glanced around nervously, as if afraid someone might be listening. "I can't talk about it here, not now. You need to leave. Please, Robert, if you really care about them, you'll leave now." "I'm not going anywhere without my daughters," Robert declared, his voice firm. "You took 3 years with them from me. 3 years I'll never get back. You put me through hell, Marcella, and now you want me to just walk away as if nothing happened?" Marcella took a step forward, her expression shifting from fear to something closer to desperation. "You can't take them. They don't know you. They won't want to go with you. And if you try to force them, you'll only traumatize them more." Robert felt anger boil inside him, but at the same time, a part of him knew Marcella was right. The girls had looked at him as if he were a stranger, as if he were a threat. Forcing them to go with him now would be cruel. "Then you're going to explain everything to me," he said, trying to control his tone. "Now, I want to know exactly what happened, why you faked their deaths, how you managed to do it, and why they're living here, in these conditions, when I could have given them everything." Marcella took a deep breath, wiping tears from her face with the back of her hand. "Not here, not in front of them. Let's go somewhere. I'll explain everything, but please, not in front of the girls. They've been through enough." Robert glanced at the window where the girls were still watching. Even from that distance, he could see the fear and confusion on their little faces. His heart broke again, in a different but equally painful way. "Fine," he agreed reluctantly, "but I'm coming back. I'm not giving up on them, Marcella. They are my daughters, and I'm going to bring them back home." Marcella nodded weakly, looking as if she had aged 10 years in the last few minutes. "I know," she whispered. "I always knew this day would come." Robert took one last look at the window, trying to commit every detail of the girls' faces to memory, then turned and walked back to the gate. Isabella was still there, watching everything with wide eyes. "Thank you, Isabella," Robert said to the girl, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You have no idea what a gift you've given me today. If it weren't for you, I never would have found out." Isabella just nodded, still processing everything she had witnessed. "You're welcome, sir," she said softly. Robert got into his car, but his hands were trembling so much he had trouble putting the key in the ignition. He looked in the rearview mirror and saw Marcella still standing in the yard, watching him. She looked like a statue of sorrow and regret. He started the car and began to drive, but his mind was in complete chaos. His daughters were alive. The thought repeated in his head, like a mantra. Alive. After 3 years of believing he had lost them forever, they were alive. But at the same time, they didn't know him. They looked at him as if he were a stranger, an intruder, and Marcella had said she was protecting them. From what? From whom? None of it made sense. Robert barely noticed the drive back. When he finally parked in the garage of his Greenwich mansion, he sat in the car for long minutes, trying to process everything that had happened. The last few hours felt like a surreal dream, or perhaps a nightmare. When he entered the house, Mrs. Sebastian was in the living room, fluffing the sofa cushions. She looked at him, and immediately noticed something was different. "Mr. Miller, are you all right? You look pale." Robert ran a hand over his face, realizing there were still dried tears on his cheeks. "Sebastian," he began, but his voice failed him. He cleared his throat and tried again. "My daughters are alive." Mrs. Sebastian dropped the cushion she was holding. "What do you mean, sir?" And then Robert told her everything. About Isabella, about the address in the Bronx, about seeing the girls in the yard, about Marcella. Mrs. Sebastian listened in silence, her hands covering her mouth in shock, tears forming in her own eyes. "My God," she whispered when he finished. "The girls are alive, but how? Why?" "I don't know," Robert admitted, slumping onto the sofa. "Marcella said she was protecting them from something, from someone, but she wouldn't explain in front of them. I need to find out what happened, Sebastian. I need to understand how I got to this point." Mrs. Sebastian sat down next to him, something she would never do under normal circumstances. But this moment was far from normal. "You're going to bring them home, aren't you? The girls belong here, with you." "I am," Robert affirmed, with a determination he hadn't felt in years. "I don't know how yet, but I will. They are my daughters, and I've already lost 3 years with them. I'm not losing another day." He spent the rest of that Saturday in a state of restlessness. He tried to eat, but the food wouldn't go down. He tried to watch television, but he couldn't concentrate on anything. His mind was stuck in that simple yard, on those 2 girls who were his daughters, but who didn't recognize him. That night he went to the room that had been the girls', a room he kept exactly as it was 3 years ago, preserved like a shrine. The beds with the princess comforters they had loved, the shelves full of children's books, the stuffed animals arranged in rows, framed photos of the girls at various ages, smiling for the camera, happy and innocent. Robert sat on one of the beds and picked up the teddy bear that had been Beatrice's. She called him Brownie because of his color. He hugged the toy to his chest and finally allowed all the day's emotions to hit him at once. He cried. He cried. For the pain of the last 3 years, for the lost time, for Marcella's betrayal, for the fear and confusion he saw in his daughter's eyes. But he also cried with relief, because despite everything, despite the chaos and the pain, his girls were alive. There was a chance. There was hope. On Sunday, Robert woke with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. He needed to understand what had happened. He needed to know the whole truth before he could plan his next steps. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. After 3 rings, a man's voice answered. "Travers Law, good morning." "Paul, it's me, Robert Miller. I need to talk to you. It's urgent." Paul Travers had been Robert's lawyer during the divorce proceedings, a competent and discreet man who knew all the details of the tumultuous separation between Robert and Marcella. "Robert," Paul sounded surprised. "It's been a while. What's happened?" "My daughters are alive," Robert said bluntly. "Marcella faked their deaths. I found them yesterday, and I need your help to understand how this was possible and what I can do now." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Wait, what? What do you mean they're alive, Robert? I was at the funeral. I saw the death certificates." "They were fake," Robert explained. "Everything was forged. I don't know how yet, but it was." "Can you come over today? I need to start acting on this immediately," Paul agreed, still clearly in shock. "I'll be there in an hour." While he waited, Robert went to his office and opened the file containing all the documents related to the supposed accident. The girls' death certificates, the police report on the accident, photos of the destroyed car. He spread everything out on his desk, looking for any detail he might have missed at the time. How had he not seen it? How had he just accepted everything without question? But then he remembered the state he was in when he received the news, the shock, the unbearable pain, the fog of despair that had enveloped everything. Marcella had handled all the details, had shielded him from everything, and he had let her, unable to function properly amidst the grief. When Paul arrived, Robert met him in the office and told him everything, again this time with more detail. Paul listened, taking meticulous notes in a legal pad. "This is extremely serious, Robert," Paul said when he finished. "Falsifying death certificates is a felony. She could face heavy charges, and as for custody of the girls, well, considering what she's done, you have a strong case for full custody." I don't want to destroy her life, Robert said, surprising himself. I want my daughters back. I want to understand why she did this. And I want to make sure the girls will be okay in the process. Paul nodded. We'll need time to build a solid case. In the meantime, you should try to establish contact with the girls gradually. It won't be easy. They've lived 3 years believing a story that isn't true. They'll need time to process everything. And Marcella? Robert asked. She said she would explain everything, that she was protecting the girls. Then set up a meeting with her, Paul suggested. But don't go alone. And record the conversation. Everything she says could be relevant. You need to understand what really happened before making any legal decisions. Robert agreed. That afternoon, he sent a text message to Marcella's cell phone, a number he still had saved though he had never used it again. The message was simple. We need to talk. Tomorrow. You pick the place. The reply came an hour later. Cafe on 5th Avenue, near Grand Central. Noon. Robert barely slept that night. His mind was filled with questions, with possible scenarios, with conflicting fears and hopes. When the sun finally rose on Monday, he had been awake for hours. He arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early and chose a table in the back, away from prying ears. He ordered a coffee he knew he wouldn't be able to drink and waited. Marcella arrived punctually at noon. She looked even worse than she had on Saturday, with dark circles under her eyes and wrinkled clothes. She sat down across from him without a word, her hands trembling slightly as she ordered a tea from the waitress. So, Robert began when they were alone. I'm listening. Tell me what really happened. Marcella took a deep breath, looking down at her hands on the table. Do you remember the trouble you had with those investors about 3.5 years ago? Robert frowned, searching his memory. You're talking about the development company? That project in Atlantic City that went south? Yes, Marcella confirmed. But it wasn't just a project that went wrong, Robert. Those people, they lost a lot of money, and they blamed you. They started making threats. Robert shook his head. I know there was tension, but it was just business. These things happen. It wasn't just business, Marcella said, her voice rising slightly. They threatened you. And when they saw you weren't intimidated, they started threatening me and the girls. Robert tensed. What kind of threats? The kind you don't ignore, she answered, tears welling in her eyes. They sent messages. They said if you didn't pay them back, the girls would pay the price. Robert, I was terrified. You were so focused on the business, you didn't even notice what was happening around us. Robert felt a chill run down his spine. This couldn't be true. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't we go to the police? I tried to tell you, Marcella practically shouted, drawing the attention of a few people nearby. She lowered her voice again. But you said I was being paranoid, that it was just intimidation, that they would never actually do anything. But I knew, Robert. I felt it was real. And so what did you do? He asked, his voice tense. Marcella wiped her tears with a napkin. I sought help. I met people who could help me disappear, to protect the girls. But for it to really work, everyone had to believe they were dead, including you. Robert felt the anger rise again. So you staged an accident, forged documents, made me go through 3 years of hell thinking I had lost my daughters, all without even giving me a chance to help. If I had told you, you would have tried to stop it, Marcella said, her voice breaking. And they might have found out. I couldn't risk it, Robert. They were my daughters too, and I had to protect them the only way I knew how. Robert was silent for a long moment, processing everything. A part of him understood or tried to, but another part, the larger part, was furious at the choices she had made without him. And now, he finally asked, are these people still a threat? Marcella shook her head. No, they were arrested a year ago. It was the biggest relief of my life. But I couldn't just show up and say the girls were alive. How would I explain everything? And the girls, they were finally adjusting, creating a new life. I didn't want to turn everything upside down again. But you turned my life upside down, Robert said, his voice hard. You let me suffer. You let me die a little at a time. And the girls, Marcella, look at where they're living. Look at the conditions. They could have been in the mansion, had everything. But they're begging for money at traffic lights, Marcella. Closed her eyes, fresh tears streaming down. I did the best I could with what I had. I couldn't use our money. Any large transaction could have raised suspicion. I had to start from scratch. I got odd jobs, but it was never enough. And yes, sometimes the girls help at the light when things are really tough. I hate it, but it's the reality I managed to build to keep them alive. Robert looked at the woman across from him, a woman he had once loved, who had been his wife, the mother of his daughters. And all he saw now was a stranger who had made the most important decisions of his life, without including him. "I'm going for custody," he said finally. "You understand that, right? After everything you've done, I can't just leave things as they are." Marcella nodded slowly as if she had been expecting it. "I know. And maybe it's for the best. But please, Robert, do it the right way. Don't traumatize the girls more than they already have been. They don't understand any of this yet. To them, I'm all they have. I'll do what's best for them," Robert assured her. "And that includes having them back with me, where they always should have been." He stood up, leaving money on the table for the bill, and walked out without looking back. Marcella sat there alone, her tea cold and untouched before her, the weight of all her choices finally catching up to her. The following days were a roller coaster of emotions for Robert. He found himself alternating between moments of euphoria at knowing his daughters were alive and moments of deep anguish at remembering they didn't recognize him, that to them he was just a frightening stranger who had invaded their lives. Paul Travers had immediately started working on the case, gathering documentation, consulting with family law experts, and preparing a legal strategy. But he had been clear with Robert. The process would be long and complicated. It wasn't just a matter of proving the girls were his daughters, something a simple DNA test could resolve. It was a matter of demonstrating that it would be in the girls' best interest to live with him, while also dealing with the criminal charges against Marcella for falsifying documents. "Robert," Paul had said in one of their meetings, "you need to understand that, in the eyes of the law, these girls have spent 3 years under their mother's exclusive care. They're 12 now, old enough for their opinions to be considered by a judge. If they say they want to stay with Marcella, that will weigh heavily on the decision." "Then I need to win them back," Robert had replied, a steely determination in his voice. "I need to get them to know me, to trust me again." But how to do that? How to approach 2 girls who saw him as a threat? Robert spent entire nights thinking about it, sifting through old memories, trying to remember what they liked, what made them happy. On Wednesday of that week, he made a decision. He couldn't just wait for the legal process to take its slow course. He needed to act, to be present in their lives somehow. So that morning, he drove back to the Bronx, to that simple street where his daughters lived. This time he didn't go directly to the house. Instead, he parked a few blocks away and waited. It was 7 in the morning, and he figured the girls would soon be leaving for school. If they were. Even attending school, he thought with a pang of concern. Half an hour later, his patience was rewarded. The door of the blue house opened, and the 2 girls came out, wearing simple school uniforms, backpacks on their shoulders. Marcella came out with them, locking the door behind her. She walked them to the bus stop on the corner, waited with them until the vehicle arrived, gave each a kiss on the forehead, and watched them get on. Robert noted the bus number and the name of the school printed on their backpacks. At least Marcella was keeping the girls. In school, that was something. But what kind of school was it? What were their learning conditions? He waited until Marcella went back inside, and then followed the bus from a distance, maintaining a safe gap. 20 minutes later, the vehicle stopped in front of a public middle school. Robert saw the girls get off with other children, all wearing the same simple uniform. He parked across the street and watched as they entered the building, talking to each other, looking like normal girls going to another normal day of school. But they weren't normal girls, they were his daughters. The daughters of a man who could afford the best private schools in New York, who could give them everything they needed, and more. And instead they were here, in a public school with limited resources, because their mother had decided to hide them from the world. Robert sat in his car for a long time, watching the school's activity. Children playing in the yard, teachers coming and going, parents dropping off and picking up their kids. a slice of New York life that he rarely witnessed up close. When classes ended at 5 in the afternoon, Robert was still there. He had spent the whole day waiting, making work calls from the car, eating a sandwich he had bought at a nearby deli, but never taking his eyes off the school for long. When the girls came out, he followed them again, keeping his distance. They took the same bus back, got off at the same stop and walked the 2 blocks home. But this time, instead of going straight inside, they stopped at the small corner market. Robert parked and watched through the storefront window. They were looking at the shelves, talking to each other, and then one of them picked up a package of cookies. They went to the register, placed some coins on the counter, but it seemed it wasn't enough. The market owner, an older man, said something to them, and Robert saw the disappointed expressions on the girls' faces. They put the cookies back and left empty-handed. Something broke inside Robert's chest. His daughters didn't have enough money to buy a simple package of cookies. A millionaire's daughters, in need. He waited for the girls to walk away and then entered the market. The owner greeted him with a nod. "Good afternoon. What can I get for you?" Robert looked around, grabbing some basic items, bread, milk, fruit, and then added several packages of cookies, chocolates, juices. When he got to the register with the full basket, the owner commented, "Stocking up, are we?" "It's for some kids," Robert replied vaguely, paying in cash. "By the way, those 2 girls who were just in here, do they come here often?" The owner nodded as he bagged the groceries. "Oh, Julia and Bea? Yeah, almost every day. Poor things, always trying to stretch the little money they have. Their mum works hard, but things are tough. You know how it is." Robert felt a lump in his throat upon hearing the nicknames. Julia and Bea, the same nicknames he used when they were little. "You know them well?" "I do. They've lived on the street for about 2 years now. Polite girls, always very quiet. Julia's the talkative one, but Bea is sweet too. Why do you ask?" "Just curious," Robert lied, taking the bags. "Thanks." He left the store and went back to his car, putting the groceries on the back seat. Then he just sat there thinking. He wanted to go to the house, knock on the door, give these things to the girls. But he knew that would only scare them more. He needed to find another way. In the following days, Robert established a routine. Every morning, he would go to the school and watch the girls go in. Every afternoon, he was there when they came out. He never got too close, never let them see him, but being near them, being able to see them, knowing they were okay, brought a strange comfort to his broken heart. He also started doing other things. He spoke to the market owner and left money in advance, with instructions that whenever the girls came to buy something, he should cover the difference. He made a generous anonymous donation to the school, specifying it should be used to improve the library and the science lab equipment. He found out there was an underfunded after-school tutoring program and made another donation. They were small things, ways of being present in the girls' lives even if they didn't know it, but Robert knew it wouldn't be enough. He needed to really get to know them, to talk to them, to start building a relationship. It was Paul who suggested the approach. "Robert, you need Marcella's consent to start having contact with the girls. If you keep showing up unannounced, she could claim harassment, and that will hurt your case. You need to do things the right way." So, Robert called Marcella. The conversation was tense, full of uncomfortable silences and thinly veiled accusations. But in the end, Marcella agreed. She knew she had no choice. If she refused completely, it would look like she was preventing a father from knowing his daughters, and that wouldn't look good for her when the case went to court. "We can meet at the park," she suggested. "Saturday morning I'll bring the girls, but you can't just come up and say you're their father. Not like that out of the blue. You need to go slow, Robert. They're confused and scared." "I understand," Robert agreed, though every fiber of his being screamed against the idea of having to hide who he really was. "I'll do it your way, for their sake." On Saturday morning, Robert woke up earlier than ever. He chose casual clothes, jeans, and a simple shirt, wanting to look approachable, not threatening. He mentally rehearsed what he would say, how he would act, trying to anticipate all the girls' possible reactions. The park Marcella had chosen was a public place, large, with many families on weekends. When Robert arrived at 10 in the morning, He saw Marcella sitting on a bench near the playground with the two girls beside her. They were eating popcorn from a paper bag, watching other children play on the equipment. Robert took a deep breath, trying to calm the nerves that felt like they were about to crawl out of his skin, and walked toward them. Marcella saw him first and said something, quietly, to the girls. They looked in his direction, and Robert saw immediate recognition and tension on their little faces. He approached slowly, maintaining a friendly, non-threatening expression. "Good morning," he said when he was close enough. "Good morning," Marcella replied, her voice formal. "Girls, do you remember?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Mr. Miller." The girls just nodded, silent, clutching the popcorn bag as if for protection. "I brought something," Robert said, pulling two books from the backpack he was carrying. He had chosen carefully, books about animals, knowing Julia had always loved them, and a professional drawing book with high-quality colored pencils for Beatrice. "I don't know if you like these things, but I thought you might." He held out the gifts, but the girls didn't move to take them. They looked at Marcella, seeking guidance. She gave a slight nod, and then hesitantly they each took their book. The one Robert was sure was Julia looked at the book about marine animals, her eyes scanning the colorful images on the cover. Beatrice opened the drawing set, observing the pencils arranged by shade. "Thank you," Julia whispered, so softly Robert almost didn't hear. "You're welcome," he replied, his heart aching. "May I sit?" he asked Marcella. She gestured to the bench next to theirs, and Robert sat down, keeping a respectful distance. For a few minutes, no one said anything. The girls flipped through their books. Marcella looked out at the park, and Robert tried to find the right words. "So," he began finally, "do you like coming to this park?" "Sometimes," Julia answered, still not looking directly at him. "When Mom has time." "And school? How is school?" Robert tried to keep the conversation light and casual. "It's good," Beatrice answered this time, her voice even softer than her sister's. "We like the art teacher." "Oh, really?" Robert perked up slightly. "You like to draw?" Beatrice nodded, finally glancing at him for a brief moment before looking away again. "I draw every day, when I can." "What kind of things do you like to draw?" "Landscapes," Beatrice replied, relaxing minimally. "Houses, gardens, sometimes animals too." "And you, Julia?" Robert turned to the other girl. "What do you like to do?" Julia looked directly at him now, and there was something in her eyes, a sharp intelligence, a perception beyond her years. She was sizing him up, trying to understand who he was and what he wanted. "I like animals," she said finally. "Always have. I want to be a vet when I grow up." Robert felt tears prick his eyes. It was exactly what she used to say when she was 9. Some dreams, apparently, survived everything. "That's great," he managed to say, keeping his voice steady. "It's a wonderful profession. Helping animals." "Yeah," Julia agreed, and then to everyone's surprise she asked, "Did you know us before?" The question caught Robert completely off guard. Marcella tensed beside him as well. He glanced quickly at Marcella, looking for guidance on how to answer, but she just looked away. Robert decided to be as honest as possible without revealing the whole truth at once. "Yes," he answered carefully. "I knew you when you were younger. Much younger." "Then why don't we remember you?" Beatrice asked, joining the conversation now, her curiosity overcoming her fear. "Because it was a long time ago," Robert explained. "And you were very little. Sometimes we don't remember things from when we were very small." "But you remember us," Julia insisted, and there was something in her voice, a need to understand that broke Robert's heart again. "I do," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I remember a lot about you." "Like what?" Julia challenged, crossing her arms. Robert thought carefully before answering. He couldn't reveal too much, couldn't scare the girls with memories that might not make sense to them now, but he didn't want to lie either. "I remember," he began slowly, "that one of you loved animals from a very young age, always wanted a dog, and the other spent hours drawing, creating whole worlds on paper. I remember you were inseparable, Always together, always taking care of each other. The girls looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them. "How do you know those things?" Beatrice asked, her voice small but firm. "Because I paid attention," Robert answered simply. "Because you are special." Marcella intervened then, her voice tense. "Girls, why don't you go play for a bit while I talk to Mr. Miller?" The girls hesitated, but then stood up, taking their gifts with them. They went to the playground, but Robert noticed they stayed close enough to see him and Marcella. "You can't do that," Marcella said as soon as the girls were out of earshot. "You can't keep dropping hints about their past. It will only confuse them more." "They have a right to know the truth," Robert replied, keeping his voice low, "and I have a right to be in their lives. I'm not going to pretend to be just some kind stranger who brought gifts." "You don't understand," Marcella insisted. "They've been through so much. The move, having to hide who they were, living in fear. They're finally feeling safe. And now you show up and mess everything up again." "I'm not messing anything up," Robert retorted, anger beginning to simmer again. "You're the one who messed everything up when you decided to pretend they were dead. You're the one who took them from the life they deserved to have. I'm just trying to fix what you broke." Marcella closed her eyes, taking a deep breath to control herself. "Look, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But please, for the girls' sake, do this the right way. Let them get used to you first. Let them trust you. And then, when they're ready, we'll tell them everything." "And when exactly will they be ready?" Robert asked. "When you find it convenient." "Marcella, I've already lost 3 years. 3 years I'll never get back. I'm not going to wait indefinitely for your permission to be a father to my own daughters." Marcella didn't answer. She just looked at the girls on the playground, their worried faces turned toward them. "Look what we're doing to them," she said quietly. "They're scared, Robert. Scared and confused. We need to stop thinking about what we want and start thinking about what's best for them." Robert followed her gaze and saw the expressions on the girls' faces. Marcella was right. They were scared. And he didn't want to be another source of fear in their lives. "All right," he agreed reluctantly. "We'll go slow. But I want to see them regularly. Not once a month or whenever you deem it appropriate. Regularly. And eventually they will know the truth. Because they deserve to know." Marcella nodded. "Deal." They stayed at the park for another hour. Robert tried to talk to the girls, asking questions about their interests, their classes, their friends. Julia was more talkative, though still cautious, answering his questions but not fully opening up. Beatrice was quieter, observing more than speaking, but every now and then she would smile at something Robert said, and those smiles were like rays of sunshine on a cloudy day. When they finally said goodbye, Robert knelt down to be at the girl's eye level. "It was really nice spending time with you today," he said sincerely. "I hope we can do this again soon." "Okay," Julia replied, clutching the animal book to her chest. "Thanks for the book." "Thank you," Beatrice echoed, her voice almost inaudible. Robert felt an urge to hug them, to pull them close and never let go. But he controlled himself. He just nodded and walked away, feeling the girl's eyes on his back as he headed for his car. When he got into the vehicle, he let his head fall against the steering wheel and allowed himself to cry. It had been harder than he had imagined, seeing his daughters, being able to touch them if he wanted, but having to hold back, having to act like a kind stranger instead of the father he was. It was a different kind of torture, but no less painful. But he wouldn't give up. He would never give up. Julia and Beatrice were his daughters, and he would do whatever it took to bring them back home. The weeks that followed brought a subtle but significant change to Robert Miller's routine. For the first time in 3 years, he had something other than grief to occupy his thoughts. He had a purpose, a reason to wake up every morning. His daughters were alive, and he was determined to win back the place he should have always had in their lives. The meetings with Julia and Beatrice became regular, twice a week, always with Marcella present, always in public places. Robert respected the established boundaries, as much as it pained him to measure every word, every gesture, as if walking on broken glass. On their third meeting, he took them for ice cream at a shop near their house. Julia chose chocolate with strawberry, and Beatrice spent long minutes deciding between vanilla and lemon, finally settling on vanilla. Robert observed every detail, committing these small things to memory. Their tastes, their preferences, the ways they interacted with the world. While they were having ice cream, Julia was the one who broke the ice this time. "Do you have kids?" she asked suddenly, licking her spoon. The question hit Robert like an arrow. He glanced quickly at Marcella, who looked away, clearly uncomfortable. How could he answer this without lying, but without revealing the truth just yet? "I do," he replied carefully, feeling each word weigh on his tongue. "2 daughters." "Oh, really?" Julia seemed genuinely interested now. "How old are they?" "The same age as you," Robert said, watching their reactions closely. "In fact, they're a lot like you." Beatrice, who had been quiet until then, looked at him with curiosity. "Like us how?" Robert chose his words. Carefully. "They're twins, too, and one of them loves animals, just like you, Julia. Always dreamed of being a vet. The other loves to draw, to create beautiful things on paper, just like you, Beatrice." The girls exchanged a puzzled look. "That's weird," Julia commented, "that they're so much like us." "Sometimes coincidences are like that," Robert said, though his heart was tight. "The world works in mysterious ways." "And where are they?" Beatrice asked. "Why didn't they come for ice cream with us?" Robert felt his throat close up. How could he explain? How could he say they were right there sitting in front of him without revealing the whole truth? "They're busy today," he lied, hating himself for it. "But maybe one day you can meet them." Marcella intervened then, quickly changing the subject. "Girls, why don't you tell me about your science project at school? You were so excited about it yesterday." The distraction worked, and the girls began to talk about a project on the water cycle they were developing. Robert listened attentively, asking questions, showing genuine interest. And it was genuine. Every detail of their lives was precious to him. After the ice cream, they walked a bit in the nearby square. Robert bought popcorn for the girls, and they sat on a bench to eat, watching the pigeons that gathered for crumbs. Julia threw bits of popcorn to the birds, laughing when they fought over the larger pieces. Beatrice watched everything with her observant gaze, as if memorizing the scene to draw later. "You know," Robert said casually, "when my daughters were little, we used to do this. Come to the square, feed the pigeons. They loved it." "Do you spend a lot of time with them?" Beatrice asked, looking at him. The question hurt more than Robert expected. "I used to," he answered honestly, "but some things happened and I was away from them for a while. It was the worst time of my life." "Why were you away?" Julia asked, always the more direct of the two. "Sometimes things happen in ways we can't control," Robert explained, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes other people make decisions for us, and we only find out later that those decisions were wrong." Marcella shifted uncomfortably beside him, but said nothing. "But did you go back to them?" Beatrice wanted to know. "I'm trying," Robert replied, looking directly at the two girls. "I'm doing everything I can to be close to them again, because no matter what happens, no matter how much time passes, a father never stops loving his daughters." There was a moment of silence, and then Julia asked softly, "Do they love you too?" Robert felt tears prick his eyes. "I hope so," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I really hope so. Even if they don't remember me well right now, I hope that deep down somehow they know I was always there. I always loved them and I always will. And The girls were quiet after that, thoughtful. Robert realized he might have gone too far, revealed too much, but he couldn't regret it. They needed to know, even if indirectly, even if they didn't fully understand yet. The meetings continued. Robert took them to the movies to see an animated film about a girl who could talk to animals. Julia loved it, her eyes glued to the screen the whole time, laughing at the funny parts and getting emotional at the sad ones. Beatrice enjoyed it too, but Robert noticed she spent part of the time observing the reactions of other people in the theater, that artist's eye always studying the world around her. After the movie, at a diner, Julia couldn't stop talking about how amazing it would be if they could really talk to animals. "I'd ask them what they feel, what they think," she said excitedly. "I'd help the ones that are hurt, the ones that are lonely. "You have a very kind heart," Robert said, pride swelling in his chest. "You'll be an incredible veterinarian one day." Julia smiled at him, a genuine smile that lit up her whole face. It was the first time she had smiled at him like that, without reservation, without fear. Robert felt like he had just won the greatest victory of his life. On another outing, Robert brought professional art supplies for Beatrice. Small canvases, acrylic paints, real brushes. Her eyes widened when she saw it all. "Is this for me?" she asked, incredulous. "It is," Robert confirmed. "I thought you might like to try painting on canvas instead of just paper." Beatrice looked to Marcella for approval. Her mother nodded, and then the girl turned to Robert with a shy but radiant smile. "Thank you. Thank you so much. No one's ever given me anything like this before." The words cut Robert like a blade. No one had ever given her decent materials to do what she loved. His daughter, who should have had access to the best art classes, the best teachers, the best materials, was thanking him for a basic painting kit, as if it were the world's greatest treasure. That night, when Robert returned home, he went to the girls' room, the room he kept preserved like a shrine. He opened the closet, and there were all the things they had left behind, clothes that no longer fit, toys they had loved, Beatrice's drawings carefully stored in folders, books about animals that Julia used to read over and over. He took out one of the folders and opened it, looking at the drawings. Beatrice was only 9 when she made them, but the talent was already there. Firm lines, attention to detail, a special sensitivity for color. And now at 12 she was even better. Robert had seen some recent drawings she had shyly shown him, and they were impressive. His daughters were growing up, developing their talents, their dreams, and he had missed 3 years. Of that process, 3 years that would never come back. The anger toward Marcella returned, strong and bitter. How had she dared to steal this from him? To steal this from them? But then he thought of Paul Travers' words. "You need to prove you can offer a better environment for the girls. You need to show you're thinking of their well-being, not just your own desire to have them back." Robert was trying. He was really trying to do things the right way. But it was so hard, so painfully hard. The following month there was an unexpected breakthrough. Julia called him. It was the first time one of the girls had initiated contact, and Robert almost dropped the phone in surprise when he saw Marcella's number on the screen. "Hello?" he answered quickly, his heart pounding. "Mr. Miller." It was Julia's voice, hesitant but determined. "Julia, is everything okay?" "Yeah, it's okay. It's just, there's a little dog here near my house. He's hurt. I think he was hit by a car or something, and I don't know what to do. Mom said we don't have money to take him to a vet right now, and I remembered. You said I could call if I needed anything, so—" She was speaking quickly, the words tumbling over each other, and Robert could hear the worry and desperation in her voice. "Where are you?" he asked, already grabbing his car keys. "Send me your exact location. I'm on my way now." "Really?" Her voice rose in pitch, relieved. "You really can?" "Of course I can. Send me the location. I'm leaving now." 15 minutes later, Robert was parking on the street where the girls lived. Julia was on the sidewalk, kneeling beside a small mixed-breed dog that was clearly injured. Beatrice was with her, holding an old towel. When they saw Robert, they both stood up. "He's really bad," Julia said as soon as Robert approached, tears streaming down her face. "He's in a lot of pain. We have to help him." Robert knelt beside the dog, assessing the injuries. "We'll take him to the vet right now," he said, taking the towel from Beatrice's hands and carefully wrapping the animal. "Can you come with me?" The girls looked toward the house. Marcella had appeared at the door, watching the scene. Robert met her gaze, and after a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "You can go, but come back soon." The drive to the nearest veterinary clinic was quick. Julia held the dog on her lap, whispering comforting words to the frightened animal. Beatrice kept stroking the dog's head, trying to calm him as well. At the clinic, the veterinarian examined the dog immediately. "He has a broken paw and some scrapes, but nothing too serious," she explained. "We'll need to do a small procedure, put on a splint. He's going to be fine." Julia let out a sigh of relief, so deep her whole body seemed to relax. "He's really going to be okay." "He will," the vet assured her with a kind smile. "You must have found him just in time. A few more days without treatment, and it would have been worse." After the procedure, while the dog was resting in a recovery cage, the vet called Robert over to talk about the costs. It was a considerable sum, but he didn't even blink before paying. Money was the least of his worries. When he returned to the waiting room, he found Julia and Beatrice sitting side by side, still watching the dog through the glass window of the recovery room. "He's going to be fine," Robert announced, sitting down beside them. "The doctor said that in a few weeks he'll be running around as if nothing happened." Julia turned to him, her eyes still moist but shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Miller. Thank you so much. I didn't know what to do, and you came so fast." "You don't need to thank me," Robert said gently. "I know how important animals are to you. I wasn't going to let you go through this alone." "But it must have been expensive," Beatrice said, worried. "The treatment, the medicine, everything." "Don't worry about that," Robert assured them. "The important thing is that he's going to be okay." "So now what?" Julia asked. "What do we do with him? He doesn't have an owner." Robert thought for a moment. "Well, first he needs to recover. How about we leave him here at the clinic until he's better, and then we'll decide what to do." "Can we visit him?" Beatrice asked hopefully. "Of course you can, whenever you want." In the following days, Robert took the girls to visit the dog at the clinic. They had named him Courage. Because he had been brave, he had survived, he had fought. With each visit, the dog was a little better, more lively, and the bond between him and the girls grew stronger. Julia spent hours talking to the veterinarian, asking a million questions about treatments, animal care, and how to become a vet. The doctor, a woman in her 40s named Dr. Helen, answered every question with patience and enthusiasm. "You have a real passion for this," she told Julia during one visit. "That's rare in someone so young. If you keep this up, you'll be an exceptional veterinarian." Julia beamed at the compliment. "It's him who encourages me," she said, looking at Robert. "He always says I have a talent for it." Robert felt his heart swell. It was the first time Julia had mentioned him to someone else, had included him in her life in that way. It was a small but significant step. When Courage was finally discharged, the inevitable question arose, where would he stay? The girls desperately wanted to keep him, but the house where they lived with Marcella was small with no proper yard, and Marcella had already made it clear they couldn't have a dog there. "He can stay with me," Robert offered. "I have a big house with a garden. He'll have all the space he needs." "Really?" Julia asked, her eyes lighting up. "You'd do that?" "Of course," Robert replied, "but on one condition." The girls waited, tense. "You have to come visit him all the time. He'll miss you, and you can help take care of him, train him, do everything a responsible owner does." The girls agreed immediately, enthusiastically. And so, Courage went to live at Robert's mansion in Greenwich, and the girls began to visit the house regularly. The first time they entered the mansion, Robert carefully observed their reactions. They walked through the enormous rooms with wide eyes, clearly impressed, but also a little uncomfortable. "Your house is very big," Beatrice commented quietly. "Do you live here alone?" "I do," Robert admitted. "It's too big for one person. It used to be different, when there were more people here." "What kind of people?" Julia asked while petting Courage, who was already settling into his new home. "My family," Robert said simply, "before everything changed." They didn't ask any more questions, but Robert saw the curiosity in their eyes. They were starting to put the pieces together, even if they didn't have the full picture yet. Mrs. Sebastian was emotional seeing the girls. She had known them when they were little, had cared for them, and although she knew she shouldn't reveal anything, it was hard to contain her emotion. When the girls went into the garden to play with Courage, she approached Robert with tears in her eyes. "It's them, Mr. Miller. Our girls. They've grown so much." "They have," Robert confirmed, watching the girls through the window. "And I'm going to bring them home, Sebastian. I'm going to bring my daughters back." The visits became more frequent, 2-3 times a week, always to take care of Courage, but gradually the girls started staying longer, exploring the house, asking questions, relaxing. Robert set up a small art studio for Beatrice in one of the spare rooms, with an easel, paints, everything she needed. And for Julia, he transformed part of the garden into a space where she could interact with Courage and learn about animal care. One afternoon, while Julia was in the garden teaching Courage tricks and Beatrice was painting in the studio, Marcella showed up unannounced. Robert was in his office when Mrs. Sebastian announced her arrival. Marcella entered the house with a tense expression, her arms crossed defensively. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. Robert led her to the office and closed the door. "What is it?" "You're making them get attached to you," Marcella accused. "This house, the gifts, the dog. You're buying their affection." Robert felt anger rise. "I'm not buying anything. I'm giving them what they always should have had. What you took from them when you decided to hide them." "I already explained why I did it," Marcella retorted. "And I understand your reasons," Robert said, trying to stay calm. "But that doesn't change the fact that you deprived them of a better life. Look where they were, Marcella, and look where they could have been all this time." "It's not just about money, Robert," Marcella argued. "It's not about mansions and expensive gifts. It's about security, about love, about being present." "And you think I can't give them that?" Robert challenged. "You think only you can love them?" Marcella was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was lower, more vulnerable. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared of losing them. They're all I have, Robert. If you take them from me—" "I don't want to take them from you," Robert interrupted, surprising them both. "I just want to be in their lives too. I want to be the father I should have been all along." "But the legal process," Marcella said. "You're seeking full custody." Robert sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I was. But maybe it doesn't have to be that way. Maybe we can find another solution, one that works for everyone, especially for them." Marcella stared at him, trying to decipher if he was being sincere. "What are you proposing?" "Joint custody," Robert said. "They can spend time with me, time with you. They can go to a better school, have access to things you can't provide alone. But you're still their mother. That doesn't change." "And what about the charges?" Marcella asked cautiously. "The fake documents, all of that," Robert thought carefully. "If we can make this work, if it's really what's best for the girls, maybe I don't need to press those charges, but," he added firmly, "they need to know the truth soon. We can't keep lying to them." Marcella closed her eyes, and when she opened them, there were tears there. "I know, you're right. They deserve to know." "Then let's tell them together," Robert suggested. "Let's sit down with them and explain everything. It will be hard, but it's the right thing to do." Marcella nodded slowly. "When?" "Soon," Robert said. "Very soon. They're already asking questions. They're already sensing something is wrong. It's better they hear it from us than find out on their own." That night, after Marcella had taken the girls home, Robert stayed up late thinking. Things were changing, evolving in ways he hadn't anticipated. He still felt angry at Marcella, still hurt deeply by what she had done. But for the first time, he could see beyond his own pain. He could see that, despite everything, she loved the girls too. She had made terrible decisions, but she had done it out of love, out of fear of losing them. And now, together, maybe they could fix at least part of what had been broken. Maybe they could give the girls what they needed most, the truth, and a complete family again, even if in a different form than before. But first they needed to find the right words. They needed to find the right way to reveal a secret that had lasted for 3 years, a secret that would change everything once more. And Robert knew that day was coming fast, very fast. The decision to tell the truth came in an unexpected way. It was Beatrice who forced the situation, though she didn't know it at the time. It was a Thursday afternoon, and the girls were at Robert's mansion, as had become common in recent weeks. Julia was in the garden with Courage, and Beatrice had gone upstairs alone, something she rarely did. Robert was in his office when he heard a scream coming from one of the bedrooms. He ran up the stairs, his heart pounding, and found Beatrice standing in the doorway of the room that had once been the girls'. The door was open, something Robert was sure he had left closed. Beatrice was motionless, staring into the room with an expression of absolute shock on her face. "Beatrice?" Robert called softly, approaching slowly. "What is it?" She turned to him, her eyes wide and confused, and then pointed into the room. That room, it has my things in it, my drawings, my toys. How are they here? Robert felt his blood run cold. He had forgotten. He had forgotten that at some point the girls might explore the house, open that door, find the shrine he had kept untouched for 3 years. Beatrice entered the room slowly, as if in a trance. She went to a shelf and picked up one of the stuffed animals, a pink rabbit worn with time. "I know this," she whispered. "I remember this. I had this rabbit. I did." She looked around, her eyes taking her in every detail of the room. The twin beds with the princess comforters, the dresser with colourful stickers, the shelves full of books and toys, and then her eyes landed on the framed photos on the wall. She dropped the rabbit and walked toward the photos as if hypnotized. They were pictures of the girls at various ages. Babies, toddlers, at 7, 8, 9 years old, and in many of them they were with Robert and Marcella, smiling, happy, a complete family. Beatrice picked up one of the photos, her hands trembling. "This is me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "And that's Julia. We were little. And this man." She looked at Robert and then back at the photo. "This man is you." Robert didn't know what to say. The words were stuck in his throat, and he could only stand there, watching as his daughter connected the pieces of the puzzle. "Why do you have pictures of me?" Beatrice asked, still looking at the photo. "Why do you have my drawings, my toys, my room?" She turned to face him, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Who are you really?" Before Robert could answer, Julia appeared, at the bedroom door, drawn by the noise. She stopped abruptly at the scene, Beatrice holding the photo, Robert pale and frozen. "What's going on?" Julia asked, looking from one to the other. Beatrice turned to her sister, holding out the photo. "Look at this. Look at this room. It has our things in it, Julia, things from when we were little, pictures of us with him." Julia entered the room slowly, her eyes widening as she realized what Beatrice was saying. She walked to the other bed and picked up the brown teddy bear that was carefully positioned on the pillow. "Brownie," she whispered, clutching the toy to her chest. "This is Brownie. I remember him. I remember." The two girls looked at each other, and Robert saw the exact moment that understanding began to dawn on their faces. It was like watching a dam break, the truth seeping through the cracks they themselves had started to open with their questions over the weeks. "You're our father," Julia said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. "The daughters you said you have, who are our age, who like the same things we do, it's us, it was always us." Robert felt tears stream down his face, making no attempt to hide them. "Yes," he said, his voice breaking. "Yes, you are my daughters, you always were. Julia and Beatrice Miller, my girls." Beatrice dropped the photo, the glass of the frame cracking as it hit the floor. "But Mom said, she said our father left, that he didn't want us anymore, that we had to change our names to hide." "I never left," Robert said desperately, taking a step toward them. "I would have never left. I thought I had lost you. I thought you had—" He couldn't. "Finish the sentence." "You thought we died," Beatrice completed, comprehension dawning in her eyes. "That's why you visited those graves. That's why you were so shocked when you saw us. You thought we were dead." Julia was trembling now, the teddy bear still clutched to her chest. "Mom lied? She lied to everyone, to you, to us." At that moment, Marcella appeared at the door. She had arrived to pick up the girls, and Mrs. Sebastian, sensing the situation, had brought her upstairs. Marcella's face was white as she took in the scene, the girls in the preserved room, the scattered photos, Robert with tears on his face. "Mom," Julia turned to her, her voice rising. "What is happening? Why does he have these things? Why is he saying he's our father?" Marcella closed her eyes, and when she opened them, tears were already falling. "Because it's true," she said in a broken voice. "He is your father, and she took a deep breath, "I pretended you had died to protect you." The silence that followed was deafening. The girls looked at Marcella as if she were a stranger, as if they had never seen her before. "You lied," Beatrice said, her voice low but full of pain. "You lied about everything." "I did what I thought was right," Marcella tried to explain, taking a step toward the girls. "There were dangerous people, real threats. I had to protect you." Protect us from what? Julia screamed, her voice echoing through the room. From our father? From the man who loved us? You took us away from him. You made him think we were dead. How could you? You don't understand, Marcella was crying openly now. I had no choice. If I had done things differently, you could have been truly hurt. I just wanted to keep you safe. So you hid us, Beatrice said, the pieces finally clicking completely into place. That's why we had to change our names. That's why we live in that little house. That's why you never let us talk about the past. You erased our entire lives. Julia turned to Robert, still holding the teddy bear. Did you look for us? During these 3 years, did you try to find us? Every single day, Robert answered, his voice thick with emotion. I went to the cemetery every Saturday. I talked to you. I apologized for not being a better father. The pain of thinking I had lost you completely consumed me. I gave up everything, the business, my social life, everything, because nothing mattered anymore without you. And if that girl hadn't seen you at the cemetery? Beatrice asked. If she hadn't told you, would we have never known? Would we have stayed hidden forever? Marcella sobbed. I don't know. I was trying to find the right time, but there never seemed to be a right time. Because there is no right time for a lie like that, Julia said, her voice hard in a way that didn't match her age. You destroyed our family. You destroyed his life and ours too. The girls ran out of the room, pushing past Marcella without looking at her. Robert heard the front door slam and ran after them, Marcella close behind. They had gone into the garden and were sitting under a tree, hugging each other, crying. Robert and Marcella stopped a few yards away, not knowing what to do, what to say. How could they fix something so profoundly broken? It was Mrs. Sebastian who finally approached the girls. She knelt in front of them, her presence warm and motherly. Girls, she said gently, I know you're confused and hurt right now, and you have every right to be. But I need you to know one thing. That man over there, she pointed to Robert, he loves you more than anything in this world. When he thought he had lost you, he died a little every day. But he kept living, kept getting out of bed every morning, because deep down, somewhere in his heart, there was a small spark of hope. And that hope became reality when he found out you were alive. But he didn't know about us, Julia sobbed. All this time we existed and he didn't know. And that broke him, Mrs. Sebastian continued. But look what he did when he found out. He didn't just try to take you away from your mother. He tried to get to know you again, to earn your trust. He respected your time, even when every second away was torture. And Mom, Beatrice asked, looking at Marcella, who stood a few feet away, destroyed. Why did she do it? Because she loves you too, Mrs. Sebastian said, in a confused, perhaps wrong way, but she loves you. And sometimes when people are very afraid of losing what they love, they make desperate choices, wrong choices, but choices that come from love. Julia and Beatrice were silent for a long moment, processing everything. Then Julia asked quietly, So now what? What happens now? Now, Mrs. Sebastian said, you decide. You listen to what your father and your mother have to say, all the explanations, the whole truth, and then you decide how you want to move forward. The girls looked at each other, that silent communication only twins share. Then slowly they stood up and walked to where Robert and Marcella were standing. We want to know everything, Julia said, wiping the tears from her face. From the beginning. Why you separated. What happened. Why she did this. Everything. And Robert and Marcella, together for the first time in years with a common purpose, sat with their daughters in the garden and told them the whole story. Robert spoke of their marriage, of how good it had been at the start, of the twins' birth, the happiest day of his life, of how he had lost himself in his work, putting his career before his family, of the separation, the fights, the painful divorce. Marcella spoke of the angry investors, the threats that started coming, of the fear that grew each day, the terror that something would happen to the girls, of the desperate decision to make them disappear, to create new identities, to fake an accident. I know I did wrong, Marcella cried as she spoke. I know I should have found another way, but I was so scared. And once it was done, once you were already hidden, it was too late to go back. The lie had grown so big there was no way to undo it without destroying everything. You destroyed it anyway, Beatrice said quietly, just in a different way. I know, Marcella admitted, and I will carry that for the rest of my life. But you need to know that every day, every minute, I thought of you, of keeping you safe, happy, loved. But we weren't happy, Julia said. We saw you working so hard, going through so much. We had to ask for money at traffic lights sometimes. We lived in fear of something we didn't even know. How was that better? It wasn't, Marcella admitted. It wasn't. I made a terrible mistake, and there's nothing I can do to undo it. Robert, who had been quiet during Marcella's confession, finally spoke. But we can move forward, he said. We can try to fix what's broken. It won't be easy. It will take time. But if we all try, if we're honest with each other from now on, we can create something new. A different family, perhaps, but a family nonetheless. The girls looked at him, weighing his words. And what does that mean? Julia asked. For us, day to day? It means, Robert said carefully, that you can have both. You can have your mother, who despite everything loves you unconditionally. And you can have me, your father, who always loved you and never stopped. You can live here, have access to everything I can offer, education, opportunities, comfort. But you can also spend time with your mother, maintain the relationship you've built with her. No one is trying to take anyone away from you. And the lies? Beatrice wanted to know. How can we trust again? With time, Robert answered. With honesty. With patience. I don't expect you to forgive everything right away. I don't expect you to call me Dad tomorrow or act as if these 3 years never happened. But I hope you'll give me a chance to be the father I should have been all along. Julia and Beatrice looked at each other again, and then Julia asked, Can we think about it? About all of this? Of course you can, Robert said. Take all the time you need. The girls stood up and walked back under the tree, sitting close, talking quietly between themselves. Robert and Marcella stayed where they were, giving them space, waiting. Mrs. Sebastian brought tea for everyone, and they sat there in the garden as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Courage came and lay down at the girls' feet, as if sensing they needed comfort. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the girls returned. They stopped in front of Robert and Marcella, and it was Beatrice who spoke first. We've decided we want to try, she said. We want to get to know you better, understand who you really are, not just what we heard or thought we knew, Julia continued. But we're not going to. Forget what Mom did. It's going to take a long time for us to process all of this, and we're angry at her, very angry. Marcella nodded, tears streaming down again. I understand, and I accept that. And we want to know who we really are, Beatrice added. Our real name, our real story, everything that was taken from us. You will know everything, Robert promised. Every detail, every memory I have. I'll answer every question. I'll show you every photo, every video, every memento I've saved. And can we keep our names? Julia asked. The names Mom gave us. After we're used to them. You can choose, Robert said. You can use your original names, the new ones, or both. Whatever makes you feel most comfortable. Because, he looked directly into their eyes, no matter what name you use, you will always be my daughters. You will always be Julia and Beatrice to me, deep in my heart. The girls nodded, and then, in a move that surprised everyone, Beatrice stepped forward and hugged Robert. It was a hesitant, quick hug, but it was a start. Julia watched for a moment, and then she too stepped closer, allowing Robert to wrap them both in his arms. It wasn't the tight, desperate hug he had dreamed of for 3 years. It wasn't the dramatic, tearful reunion from the movies. It was cautious, uncertain, fragile. But it was real, and it was a beginning. When they pulled away, Julia said, We're not going to call you Dad yet. We're not ready for that. I understand, Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. You can call me by my name. You can take all the time you need. The girls then turned to Marcella. She stood there, vulnerable, awaiting a judgment she knew she deserved. Julia went to her first, and for a moment, Robert thought she would walk away. But then she hugged her mother, though more stiffly than she used to. "We still love you," Julia whispered, "but we don't trust you anymore. And it's going to take a long time to trust you again." "I know," Marcella said, clutching her daughter desperately. "I know, my love, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn that trust back." When the sun had finally set completely and night had fallen, Marcella took the girls home. But before she left, she turned to Robert. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not completely destroying me in front of them, for trying to make this work." "It's for the girls," Robert replied. "Everything has always been for the girls." When they were gone, Robert went back to the girls' room, the shrine that had been discovered. He sat on one of the beds, picked up the brownie teddy bear that Julia had left behind, and finally allowed all the day's emotions to hit him at once. He cried for the pain of all those lost years. He cried for his daughter's confusion and hurt. He cried for the breach of trust that would take so long to repair, but he also cried with relief, because finally, after 3 years of darkness, there was light, there was hope, there was a chance to rebuild, to heal, to move forward. His daughters were alive, and now finally they knew the truth. The road ahead would be long and difficult, full of obstacles and painful moments, but they would walk it together, as a family, broken, imperfect, but together. And that, Robert realized, was all that truly mattered. The months that followed the revelation of the truth were the most challenging and, at the same time, the most transformative in Robert Miller's life. Rebuilding a family doesn't happen overnight, especially when the foundations have been shaken by years of lies and separation. But Robert was determined, and more importantly, his daughters were willing to try. The first few weeks were the hardest. Julia and Beatrice moved into the Greenwich mansion, but the transition was anything but smooth. They would wake up in the middle of the night disoriented, looking for Marcella. They cried for no apparent reason, carrying the weight of all the confusing emotions they didn't know how to process. There were moments when they looked at Robert as if he were a stranger, and others when small gestures, a word, a smile, would awaken dormant memories from when they were little. Robert hired a psychologist specializing in family trauma, Dr. Patricia Almeida, a woman in her 50s with a gentle but direct approach. She began working with the girls individually and also in joint sessions with Robert and Marcella. "What you're feeling is completely normal," Dr. Almeida explained to the girls in one of the first sessions. "You've had your reality turned upside down. You discovered that the life you knew was based on secrets. It's natural to feel anger, confusion, sadness, and even relief all at the same time. There's no right or wrong way to process this." "I feel angry at Mom," Julia admitted in one session, tears streaming down her face. "But I also miss her. And that makes me even angrier because I shouldn't miss her after what she did." "Loving someone who has hurt us is one of the hardest things we can face," Dr. Almeida said gently. "But love and anger can coexist. You can be angry with your mother for the choices she made and still love her. One doesn't cancel out the other." Beatrice, always quieter, took longer to open up. But when she finally did, her words cut deep. "I feel like I don't know who I am," she confessed. "For 3 years I was one person. I had a different name, a different story. And now I've found out it was all a lie. So who am I really? The girl I thought I was? Or the girl I should have been?" "You are both, and at the same time neither," Dr. Almeida replied. "You are who you choose to be from now on. The past, both the real and the invented, is a part of you. But it doesn't define you. You have the power to decide who you want to be." While the girls were in therapy, Robert was in his own. He needed to learn to deal with the anger he still felt toward Marcella, the pain of the lost years, and most importantly, he needed to learn to be a father again. Not the father of 9-year-old girls he remembered, but the father of 12-year-old pre-teens who had lived through experiences he would never fully know. Paul Travers continued to work on the legal aspects. The situation was complex. Marcella had committed serious crimes by falsifying documents and faking the girls' deaths. But there were also extenuating circumstances, the fact that she had acted out of genuine fear, a desire to protect her daughters. And there was, above all, the girls' well-being to consider. If we press all the charges, Paul explained to Robert in a meeting, Marcella could face years in prison, but that will traumatize the girls even more. They've already lost 3 years with you. Do you want them to lose more time with their mother too? Robert thought long and hard about it. No, he finally replied, the girls have suffered enough. I want Marcella to face consequences, but not at the expense of their peace. So they reached an agreement. Marcella formally confessed to what she had done, and in exchange for her full cooperation and the guarantee that she would seek psychological help, the charges were reduced. She received community service and a suspended sentence avoiding prison. But she lost legal custody of the girls, which officially passed to Robert with visitation, rights whenever the girls wanted. Marcella accepted everything without protest. I deserve much worse, she said, when Robert went to visit her in the small apartment she had moved into, a place even more modest than the house where they had lived before. I deserve to lose everything, but please, she begged with tears in her eyes, don't take me away from them completely. They're all I have. They will decide how much they want to see you, Robert said. I won't force them to see you or to stay away from you. But you need to understand that rebuilding trust will take time, a lot of time. Julia and Beatrice's visits to Marcella began sporadically and tensely, once a week, then twice, initially monitored by Dr. Almeida. The conversations were difficult, full of questions without satisfactory answers, of expressed hurts, of tears on both sides. But slowly, very slowly, something began to change. Marcella no longer tried to justify herself, no longer tried to make the girls understand her choices. Instead, she simply listened. She listened when they talked about their anger. She listened when they recalled difficult moments from the past 3 years. She listened and accepted without trying to defend herself. And that acceptance, that genuine vulnerability, began to open small cracks in the wall the girls had built around their hearts. Meanwhile, at the Greenwich mansion, life took on a new shape. Robert enrolled the girls in one of the best private schools in New York. The transition was challenging. They were behind in some subjects, ahead in others, and completely out of place socially. Their classmates came from wealthy families, spoke of international travel, designer clothes, things Julia and Beatrice had never experienced. But they were resilient. Julia, with her more extroverted nature, made friends, more quickly, though she maintained a certain distance as if afraid to get too attached. Beatrice found her place in the school's art club, where her natural talent for drawing and painting impressed even the most critical teachers. Robert made sure to be present for everything. He went to every school meeting, every performance, every event. He helped with homework, even when he didn't understand much of the more advanced subjects. He learned to braid their hair, even if the braids were crooked at first. He learned their favorite snacks, what TV shows they liked, what music they played on, their headphones. And gradually the girls began to let down their guards. The first time Julia called him Dad was 4 months after the revelation. It was simple, almost accidental. They were in the garden with Courage, and she was trying to teach the dog a new trick. Dad, can you hold the ball while I position him? She said naturally, and then froze, realizing what she had just said. Robert's heart stopped. He slowly picked up the ball, trying not to make a big deal of it, so as not to scare her. Of course, he said, his voice thick but controlled. What do you want me to do with it? Julia looked at him, her eyes searching his. Sorry, she said quietly. It just slipped out. You don't need to apologize, Robert said gently. You can call me whatever you feel comfortable with. Dad, Daddy, Robert, anything. There's no right or wrong. Julia nodded, and they went back to training the dog. But something had changed. A barrier had fallen. And in the following weeks, Dad came more and more naturally from her lips. Beatrice took longer. She still called him Robert, and he respected that. But there were other signs. The way she sought him out when she was upset, how she showed him her drawings first, eager for his approval, how she said goodbye with a hug before leaving for school every morning. One day, 6 months after the revelation, Robert came home from a meeting to find Beatrice crying in the studio he had set up for her. She was standing in front of a canvas, brushes dropped, the painting half finished. "What happened?" Robert asked with concern, approaching her. "I can't get it right," Beatrice sobbed. "There's something in my head, an image I want to create, but I can't make it come out the right way. And I get frustrated because I should be able to, but I can't." Robert looked at the canvas. It was a portrait of a family. He could see the still unformed figures, but he recognized himself, Marcella, and the girls. "I can see what you're trying to do," he said carefully. "And it's beautiful, Beatrice, but art isn't about perfection. It's about expressing what's inside you." "But it's not coming out right," she insisted, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Robert sat down beside her. "You know what I see when I look at this? I see an incredible artist trying to capture something very complex and difficult. I see talent. I see effort. I see my daughter putting her heart into something that matters to her. And that's already perfect, just the way it is." Beatrice looked at him, her eyes still moist. "You really think so?" "I'm sure of it," Robert affirmed. "And you don't have to finish everything at once. Art takes time. Relationships take time. Healing takes time. There's no rush." Beatrice was quiet for a moment, and then she said softly, "Thanks, Dad." Robert felt tears prick his eyes. He said nothing, just pulled Beatrice into a hug, and she let herself be held, allowing herself to be vulnerable, allowing herself to be a child again, at least for a moment. As the months went by, a routine was established. The girls had their classes, their extracurricular activities, their therapy sessions. Julia started volunteering at an animal shelter on Saturdays, fulfilling her dream of working with animals, even if on a small scale for now. Beatrice had her drawings displayed in a school exhibition, and Robert invited everyone he knew, filling the makeshift gallery with people who admired her talent. Marcella was also present at these moments. The girls had insisted, and although things were still tense between her and Robert, they managed to maintain civility for their daughter's sake. Sometimes Robert even saw flashes of the woman he had once loved before everything fell apart. But he also saw the scars, the guilt she carried, the weight of choices she could never undo. A year after the truth was revealed, the family, in its new and different form, gathered at the mansion to celebrate the girl's 13th birthday. It was the first birthday celebration they had all had together since the girls were 9. Robert had prepared everything with care. There were decorations, a huge cake, presents, but more importantly, there were people. Mrs. Sebastian, whom the girls had grown to love like a grandmother, Paul Travers, who had become a family friend, Dr. Almeida, who continued to oversee their healing process, some new friends from school, and Marcella, sitting in a corner, watching everything with a sad but genuine smile. When it was time to sing Happy Birthday, Robert looked at his daughters, already so different, from the little girls he remembered, but still unmistakably his. They had grown not just physically but emotionally. They had faced a devastating truth and survived. They had chosen to forgive, even when it would have been easier to hold a grudge. They had chosen to try, even when it would have been easier to give up. Julia and Beatrice blew out the candles together, and when they opened their eyes, they looked directly at Robert. "Thank you," Julia said, "for not giving up on us, for looking for us, for being here now." "Thank you for finding us," Beatrice added, "for bringing us back home." Robert felt the tears stream freely. "You were always my home," he said. "No matter where you were, no matter what happened, you always were and always will be my home." Later that night, after the guests had left and the girls had gone up to their rooms, Marcella approached Robert. He was on the veranda, looking out at the garden where Courage slept peacefully. "Thank you," Marcella said softly, "for allowing me to be here today, for not cutting me out of their lives completely." Robert turned to face her. "They love you," he said simply. "Despite everything, they love you, and I'm not going to be the one to destroy that." Marcella nodded, tears falling silently. "I ruined everything, Robert. I tried to protect them and ended up hurting everyone. You, them, myself. If I could go back in time—" "But you can't," Robert interrupted, not with cruelty but with firmness. "No one can. All we can do is move forward, try to be better, try to do the right thing from now on." "You're doing that," Marcella said. "You're being the father they need, the father I never let you be." "And you're trying to be better too," Robert admitted. "I see the effort. I see how you don't try to manipulate anymore, how you accept the consequences, how you're really working on yourself. That matters." Marcella looked at him, surprised. "Have you forgiven me?" Robert thought carefully before answering. "I don't know if I've completely forgiven you. It still hurts. It probably always will. But I'm trying. For them. And maybe in time for myself too. Because carrying anger is exhausting, Marcella, and I've been tired for too long." They stood in silence for a moment, two former lovers who had become strangers, who had become enemies, and who were now trying to become something new. Co-parents, perhaps. People who shared a love for two extraordinary girls and were learning to put that love above their own wounds. In the months that followed, life went on. Julia was accepted into a special program for young people interested in veterinary medicine. Beatrice won a state art award for students. Robert became more actively involved in his business again, but this time with a different perspective, never allowing work to consume the time he had with the girls. There were ups and downs. Days when the girls would question everything again, feel angry, feel confused. Days when Robert felt inadequate, lost, unsure how to handle complex teenagers carrying such deep trauma. Days when Marcella would call crying, crushed by the guilt that never fully left her. But there were also good days. Days of laughter at the breakfast table, days of family movie nights, popcorn scattered on the sofa, days of Julia excitedly talking about an animal she helped treat, days of Beatrice proudly showing off a new painting, days of normalcy, of routine, of family. And it was these good days that began to outweigh the bad. Slowly, gradually, the balance tipped toward healing. 2 years after their reunion, Robert was in the garden with the girls on a Saturday morning. It was a ritual they had developed, spending Saturday mornings together doing something simple. Sometimes it was gardening, sometimes just talking, sometimes playing with Courage, who was now a large, playful, adult dog. "Dad," Julia said, throwing a ball for Courage, "do you still go to the cemetery, to those graves?" Robert stopped what he was doing. It had been a long time since anyone had brought that up. "No," he answered honestly. "I stopped when I found out you were alive. It didn't make sense anymore." "And what's there now?" Beatrice asked curiously. "Do they still have our names?" Robert nodded. "They do. I haven't had the heart to have them removed. They're part of the story, even if it's a story based on lies." The girls looked at each other, that silent communication they still shared. Then Julia said, "We want to go there, to see the graves, to see the place where you went every Saturday to think about us." Robert felt a tightness in his chest. "Are you sure? It might be difficult." "We know," Beatrice said, "but it's part of our story. We want to understand, we want to see." So they went. The following Saturday, Robert drove with the girls to the cemetery he knew so well. They walked down the familiar avenue until they reached the 2 marble headstones engraved with the names Julia Miller and Beatrice Miller. The girls stood before the headstones in silence for a long time. Then Julia asked, "What did you say to us when you came here?" Robert took a deep breath. "I apologized," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Apologized for not being a better father when I had the chance, for working too much and paying too little attention. I told you about my day, about small things that happened, as if you could still hear. And I always said that I loved you, that I would always love you." Beatrice knelt and ran her hand over one of the headstones. "You must have suffered so much," she said softly. "Coming here every week, talking to stones, thinking we were dead." Julia knelt beside her sister. "We're here now," she said. It wasn't clear if she was speaking to Robert or the headstones. "We're not dead. We're alive and we're here." Robert knelt between them, wrapping his arms around them. "I know," he whispered. "And every day I'm thankful for it. Thankful for that girl in the cemetery who had the courage to tell me. Thankful that I had the chance to find you. Thankful that you gave me a second chance." They stayed there for a while, the three of them kneeling before the empty graves that represented 3 years of pain and lies, but also of a love that endured even a fictional death. When they finally stood up and started walking back to the car, Julia asked, "What do we do with the graves now?" Robert thought for a moment. "I think we leave them," he said. "Leave them as a reminder of everything that happened, of the bad choices, the consequences, but also of overcoming it all. Proof that sometimes the things we think we've lost forever can be found again." The girls agreed. And as they got into the car and Robert started driving home, Beatrice said something that would be etched in his heart forever. "You know, what I realized," she said, "we really did die in that fake accident. The girls we were died, and for the next 3 years we were other people, but now we're being resurrected again, becoming other people still. We're not who we were before, we're not who we were during those 3 years. We're becoming new people, and I think that's okay." "It's like being reborn," Julia added. "We've had like 2 lives in one. It's weird, but also kind of special in a way." Robert smiled through his tears. "You are special," he said. "You always were. No matter what name you use, no matter which version of yourselves you are my daughters, and you are extraordinary." The years continued to pass. Julia and Beatrice grew into strong, resilient young women. Julia was accepted into veterinary school on a full scholarship, her dedication and passion for animals impressing everyone. Beatrice had her work exhibited in real galleries, her artistic talent flourishing in ways she never imagined possible. Marcella, working tirelessly on herself and on rebuilding her daughter's trust, eventually found peace too. She never lived with the girls again, but she was present in their lives, at birthdays, graduations, important moments. And slowly, very slowly, the girls learned to forgive her completely, understanding that people are complex, that love can coexist with terrible mistakes, and that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but choosing to move on. Robert, for his part, became the father he always should have been, present, attentive, loving, but also respectful, giving his daughters the space to grow and become who they wanted to be. He never remarried, never tried to fill the void Marcella had left with someone else. The girls were his focus, his joy, his reason for being. And on quiet nights, when the house was silent and he had a moment to reflect, Robert would think about how strange life was, how 3 years of unbearable pain had been necessary for him to rediscover what truly mattered, how almost losing his daughters forever had turned him into the father they always needed. He thought of Isabella, the brave girl who had the courage to approach a stranger in a cemetery and change the course of several lives. Robert had kept in touch with her over the years, helping her with her studies, ensuring she had opportunities. It was his way of saying thank you, of repaying the immeasurable gift she had given him. On a special day when Julia was turning 21 and was already in her 3rd year of veterinary school, and Beatrice had just sold her first painting to a major gallery, Robert gathered the whole family for dinner. Marcella was there, Mrs. Sebastian, Paul Travers, Dr. Almeida, Isabella, who was now in college, and of course Julia and Beatrice. Robert stood to make a toast, his wine glass raised. "I want to thank everyone here," he began, the emotion clear in his voice, "for the journey we've taken, together. It wasn't easy. There were times I thought we wouldn't make it. But look where we are. Look at these 2 incredible women sitting here who survived things that should have destroyed anyone, but instead made them stronger, wiser, more extraordinary." He looked at Julia and Beatrice, his eyes shining with proud tears. "You 2 are proof that love can survive anything. It can survive separation, lies, pain, and it can not only survive, but grow stronger. I lost 3 years with you, and that will always hurt, but I gained the chance to know the women you've become, and that is a gift I will never take for granted." Julia stood up, her eyes also moist. "Dad," she said, and it was still magical for Robert to hear that word. "You saved us. But more than that, you showed us that families can be broken and put back together. that forgiveness is possible, that love is stronger than anything. Beatrice also stood, holding her sister's hand. And that sometimes, she added, the most painful things in life can lead us where we need to be. I can't say I'm glad for what happened, but I can say I wouldn't change who we've become because of it. Everyone at the dinner was crying now, including Marcella, who stood up and, for the first time in years, hugged Robert. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not destroying me when you could have, for being the man our daughters needed." Robert hugged her back, finally allowing the last remnants of anger and bitterness to dissolve. "We did this together," he said, "all of us, and we'll keep doing it, because that's what families do. They fight, they grow, they forgive, and they love." That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Robert went up to the girls' room. Even though they had their own apartments now, they still kept rooms at the mansion. New rooms, decorated to their current tastes, but which still held pieces of their childhoods. He entered the old room, the shrine he had maintained for so long. He had decided it was time to turn it into something else, not to erase the memories, but to honor them in a different way. In the following days, with Julia and Beatrice's help, he transformed the room into something new. Half became a small toy, veterinary clinic for when Julia wanted to practice, the other half, an art studio for Beatrice. But on the walls they kept photos, old photos from when they were little, photos from the period of separation which Marcella had saved, and recent photos of who they were now. A visual timeline of 3 intertwined lives, separated, reunited, and now walking together into the future. And as Robert looked at these photos, at the evolution of his daughters from babies to women, he realized the story hadn't ended when he found them. It hadn't ended when the truth was revealed. It hadn't even ended now. The story continued. It would continue for all the days they still had ahead. In the grandchildren that might one day come, in the careers his daughters would build, in the loves they would find, in the lives they would live. And Robert would be there, for all of it, for every moment. He would never again miss a second that wasn't absolutely necessary, because he had learned in the most painful way possible that time is the most precious gift we have. And that family, true family, is not defined by blood alone, but by choice, by forgiveness, by a love that refuses to give up even when all seems lost. His daughters had died once, in an accident that never happened. They had been buried in empty graves he visited religiously. They had been lost to him for 3 agonizing years. But they had been found. They had been brought back, not just to life, but to his life, to the place where they always should have been. And that, Robert thought, as he closed the door of the renovated room and walked down the stairs of the mansion that finally, after so long, felt like a home again. That was the only thing that truly mattered. Love had won, family had won, and they had the entire future ahead of them to build the memories that the stolen years had never allowed them to create. And it would be beautiful.